What happens when the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy decide that humanity is too dangerous to govern itself? What occurs when species that have mastered faster-than-light travel, conquered death, and reshaped entire star systems look at Earth and declare its inhabitants primitively chaotic and in need of proper supervision? The Galactic Council thought they knew the answer. They had done this before, hundreds of times across thousands of worlds. Young species were always the same: aggressive, unpredictable, driven by emotion rather than logic. They needed structure, guidance, and, most importantly, control. But humanity wasn't like the others. The Council made their biggest mistake when they assumed humans would simply accept their fate. They failed to understand that the very traits they sought to suppress, humanity's stubborn independence, their refusal to bow to authority, their tendency to fight impossible odds, weren't flaws to be corrected. They were humanity's greatest strengths. This is the story of what happened when the galaxy's most powerful alliance tried to cage Earth's children and discovered that some species aren't meant to be tamed. It's the story of how humanity's primitive chaos became the force that would reshape the cosmic order forever. The Council said humanity needed guidance. They were dead wrong. The massive crystalline structure floating in the void between galaxies pulsed with an ancient light that had witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. The Galactic Council's primary station, known simply as the Nexus, stretched across 300 kilometers of perfectly geometric architecture that defied the physics of lesser species. Within its translucent walls, representatives from 47 different worlds gathered in their designated atmospheric zones, each breathing their native gases while discussing the fate of yet another young species that had dared to reach for the stars. Ambassador Zeth Kree of the Hegemony adjusted the neural interface that allowed him to process the cacophony of alien languages filling the Great Chamber. His species had transcended biological evolution 3 millennia ago, replacing their fragile organic forms with sleek mechanical bodies that could survive in any environment. The blue glow emanating from his optical sensors dimmed as he reviewed the data streaming directly into his consciousness. The species designation is human, announced the Council's AI, its voice a harmonious blend of frequencies that every species present could understand. Origin planet, Earth, Sol system, Orion arm of the Milky Way galaxy. Current technological status: early spacefaring, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 73 of their years ago. A collective murmur of what could be interpreted as amusement rippled through the chamber. 73 years was barely a heartbeat in galactic terms. Most species took centuries just to perfect their first interstellar engines. Council Speaker Mordain, whose gaseous form shifted between shades of purple and gold, floated at the center of the chamber. Her species, the Ethereals, had been among the Council's founding members over 10,000 years ago. They had guided the integration of countless civilizations into the galactic community, always with wisdom and patience. Let us examine their recent activities. Mordain's voice resonated through the specialized speakers that converted her electromagnetic communications into sound waves. In the past 7 decades since achieving FTL capability, humans have established colonies on 47 worlds, encountered 16 different alien species, and engaged in first contact protocols with interesting results. The holographic display at the chamber's center shimmered and reformed, showing a 3-dimensional map of human expansion. Red dots marked their colonies, while yellow indicators showed locations of alien encounters. What struck the assembled representatives immediately was the sheer speed of human expansion compared to other species at similar technological levels. Most concerning, continued Mordain, are the reports from our monitoring stations. Unlike other young species who approach interstellar expansion with caution and systematic planning, humans appear to operate on what their own scientists term controlled chaos. Ambassador Velkin of the Reptilian Dominion, his scarred hide bearing the marks of countless battles from his species' pre-council days, leaned forward in his environmental suit. Define controlled chaos. Speaker. Our initial reports suggested they were merely enthusiastic explorers. The AI responded by projecting a series of incident reports. Human colony ship New Horizon encountered a Class 5 solar storm that disabled their primary engines. Rather than wait for rescue, they improvised repairs using mining equipment and successfully reached their destination planet. Human research vessel Curiosity's Dream detected signs of hostile alien technology on planet designated Kepler 442b. Instead of retreating to report their findings, they landed and made first contact, ultimately establishing peaceful relations with the native species despite having no formal diplomatic protocols. The reports continued, each one highlighting humanity's tendency to adapt, improvise, and take risks that other species would consider suicidal. They had survived encounters with space pirates by turning their cargo ships into makeshift weapons platforms. They had established thriving colonies on worlds that other species had deemed uninhabitable. They had even managed to negotiate trade agreements with the notoriously xenophobic Crystalline Collective, something that had taken the Council itself centuries to achieve. Zethkree processed the information at superhuman speed, his mechanical mind calculating probabilities and outcomes. Speaker, while their methods are unconventional, their success rate is remarkably high. Perhaps their approach, while chaotic, is effective for their species. A sound that resembled bitter laughter emanated from the section reserved for the Devourers, a species that had nearly destroyed themselves through unchecked aggression before the Council's intervention saved their civilization. Their representative, a being whose name translated roughly to Death Who Thinks, spoke through a voice modulator that made even his words sound threatening. Effective until it kills them all, Death Who Thinks growled. We have seen this pattern before. Aggressive expansion, risk-taking behavior, refusal to accept guidance from their betters. My own people nearly extinguished themselves with such thinking. The humans show every sign of following the same path to destruction. The chamber fell silent as the weight of his words settled over the assembly. The Devourer civilization had indeed nearly ended themselves in a galaxy-spanning war, consuming entire star systems in their hunger for resources and conquest. Only the Council's intervention, forcibly restructuring their society and placing them under strict oversight, had prevented their complete annihilation. The Devourer representative raises a valid concern, Mordain acknowledged. However, humans have shown no signs of the destructive tendencies that characterized pre-Council Devourer expansion. Not yet, Death Who Thinks replied. But they will. The pattern is always the same. First comes rapid expansion, then resource competition, then conflict with other species, and finally, total war. We were lucky to survive our own stupidity. The galaxy cannot afford to wait, and see if humans will be equally fortunate. Ambassador Kuthara of the insectoid swarms, her compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights like 1,000 tiny stars, clicked her mandibles in what her species considered thoughtful agreement. Our hive mind analysis of human behavior patterns supports this assessment. Their tendency toward individualism and unpredictable decision-making makes them inherently unstable as a spacefaring species. They require structure, guidance, and, most importantly, oversight. I must disagree, interjected a new voice. Ambassador Lindera of the Aquatic Federation spoke from her water-filled containment sphere, her sleek form gliding gracefully through the artificial ocean that kept her species alive in the vacuum of space. Our deep ocean philosophers have studied human literature and cultural expressions that have been transmitted throughout their region of space. They show remarkable capacity for empathy, creativity, and cooperation when the situation demands it. Cooperation within their own species, perhaps, Zethkree's mechanical voice responded. But they have shown concerning levels of aggression toward perceived threats. Our analysis indicates that humans possess both the technological capability and psychological inclination to become a significant destabilizing force if left unchecked. The debate continued for hours, as was the Council's way. Each representative presented their species' perspective on the human question, drawing from millennia of experience in managing younger civilizations. The crystalline collective spoke of the need for order and predictability. The energy beings emphasized the importance of emotional control and logical decision-making. The plant-based symbionts shared their observations about human relationships with their environment. But gradually a consensus began to emerge. Despite their undeniable success in colonization and exploration, humans represented a potential threat to galactic stability. Their unpredictable nature, combined with their rapid technological advancement and expansion rate, created too many variables for the Council's carefully maintained balance of power. The question before us, Mordain finally announced, is not whether humans require guidance, but rather what form that guidance should take. The holographic display shifted to show the standard protocols that have been successfully applied to hundreds of other young species. Cultural oversight programs that gradually introduced advanced alien concepts. Technological sharing agreements that provided superior alien technology in exchange for adherence to galactic standards. Trade partnerships that created economic dependence on Council member species. Educational exchanges that taught young species the proper way to behave in galactic society. The integration protocol has proven effective in 93% of cases, the AI reported. Species that undergo proper integration show significant improvements in social stability, technological development, and interspecies relations. The remaining 7% required more intensive intervention, but all ultimately achieved successful integration into galactic society. Ambassador Zeth Kree's optical sensors brightened as he accessed deeper historical records. What about the resistance patterns? Have any species successfully rejected Council guidance? Negative. The AI responded immediately. No species has maintained independence after being selected for integration. The few that initially resisted eventually recognized the benefits of Council membership and voluntarily submitted to guidance protocols. The chamber filled with what passed for satisfied murmurs among the various species present. The integration protocol was indeed one of the Council's greatest successes, transforming potentially dangerous young civilizations into productive members of galactic society. It had prevented countless wars, ended numerous forms of species-wide suffering, and created a galaxy where thousands of different life forms could coexist in harmony. However, Death Who Thinks interjected, his voice cutting through the general approval. Humans may prove more challenging than previous subjects. Their psychological profiles show high resistance to external authority and strong attachment to concepts they term freedom and independence. All young species resist initially. Mordain replied with the patience of millennia. It is natural for them to fear what they do not understand. Once they see the benefits of Council guidance, the advantages of advanced technology, and the peace that comes from structured society, they invariably choose cooperation over isolation. The vote, when it came, was almost unanimous. Only the Aquatic Federation abstained, their representative expressing concerns about humanity's unique cultural development patterns. Even the normally cautious silicon-based collective agreed that intervention was necessary, though they recommended a gradual approach to avoid triggering excessive resistance. It is decided, Mordain announced, her form shifting to deeper shades of purple that indicated formal pronouncement. Humanity will be offered the opportunity to join the Galactic Council as a junior member species under the standard integration protocol. They will be provided with advanced technology, cultural guidance, and the benefit of our accumulated wisdom. In return, they will agree to limit their expansion rate, accept oversight of their military development, and restructure their governmental systems according to proven galactic standards. The AI began calculating the logistics immediately. Integration fleet composition will include representatives from 12 Council species, sufficient technological demonstrations to showcase the benefits of cooperation, and enforcement capabilities should peaceful integration efforts prove unsuccessful. Estimated timeline for initial contact and negotiation, 6 months. Estimated timeline for complete integration, 5 to 10 years, depending on resistance levels. As the Great Chamber began to empty, each species' representatives returning to their various homeworlds and stations, none of them noticed the small data probe that had been silently monitoring their proceedings. The probe, no larger than a grain of sand and invisible to their advanced sensors, had recorded every word, every decision, every detail of the Council's plans for humanity. It had been sent by Captain Sarachan of the Earth Defense Force, a human intelligence officer who had suspected that Earth's rapid expansion might eventually attract the attention of the galaxy's established powers. Her probe had infiltrated the Nexus 3 years earlier, part of a long-term reconnaissance operation that most Earth governments didn't even know existed. The probe began its journey back toward human space, carrying with it the most important intelligence in Earth's short interstellar history. The Galactic Council believed they were dealing with another young species that could be guided, controlled, and eventually absorbed into their perfectly ordered society. They had no idea that humans had been preparing for this moment since their first steps into space. They had no idea that humanity's chaotic expansion was actually a carefully planned strategy designed to make them too spread out and too numerous to control effectively. They had no idea that the very traits they saw as weaknesses to be corrected were exactly what humanity would use to defend their independence. The Council was about to discover that some species couldn't be guided, couldn't be controlled, and absolutely refused to be caged. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their numbers, but their stubborn, indomitable refusal to bow to any authority they hadn't chosen for themselves. The message would reach Earth in 3 weeks. Humanity would have exactly 5 months to prepare for the most important battle in their species' history. It wouldn't be fought with weapons or ships, though those would certainly play their part. It would be a battle for the very soul of human civilization, and the prize would be nothing less than their freedom to choose their own destiny among the stars. The Council had voted. Humanity needed guidance. They were about to discover just how wrong they could be. The emergency session in Earth's Global Defense Council chambers had been going on for 18 straight hours, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Representatives from every major Earth government sat around the massive circular table, their faces illuminated by the holographic display showing the intelligence gathered by Captain Shen's probe. The recordings of the Galactic Council's deliberations played for the 5th time, each replay revealing new layers of the threat facing humanity. President Elena Martinez of the United Earth Federation leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled as she processed the magnitude of what they were facing. The probe had returned just 3 days ago, and since then, the entire structure of human civilization had been quietly mobilizing for what many believed would be their final test as an independent species. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. General Harrison Kim of the East Asian Defense Alliance spoke slowly, his military bearing evident even in his exhaustion. This Galactic Council has successfully integrated hundreds of alien species over thousands of years, and they've never encountered a single species that refused to submit to their authority. Dr. Amara Okafor, the head of Earth's Xenobiology Research Division, nodded grimly. According to their own records, every species they've targeted has eventually accepted Council guidance. Some took longer than others, some required what they euphemistically call intensive intervention, but in the end, all of them surrendered their independence. Because they didn't know it was coming, Captain Chun interjected from her position near the tactical display. Her 3 years of deep space reconnaissance had given her insights that even the most experienced diplomats lacked. Every other species was caught off guard. They were approached during their early spacefaring period, when they were still figuring out faster-than-light travel and establishing their first colonies. They didn't have time to prepare, didn't have the infrastructure to resist, and, most importantly, they didn't understand what they were really being offered. Ambassador Liu Wei, Earth's most experienced interspecies negotiator, studied the alien faces frozen on the holographic display. What exactly are they being offered? The council representatives seemed to believe they were providing genuine benefits. That's the insidious part, Dr. Okafor replied, manipulating the display to show the integration protocol documentation. They're not lying when they talk about advanced technology, peace, and stability. Species that accept council guidance do receive significant technological upgrades. They do eliminate internal conflicts. They do become part of a stable galactic civilization. At what cost? President Martinez asked, though she already suspected the answer. Complete loss of autonomy. Captain Chun answered bluntly. Look at the Devourer representative, the one called Death Who Thinks. His species was aggressive and expansionist, similar to us in some ways. Now they're pacified, controlled, reduced to being a cautionary tale in council meetings. They gained physical survival, but they lost everything that made them who they were. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Galactic Council wasn't offering partnership or alliance. They were offering a gilded cage, and they genuinely believed they were doing humanity a favor by providing it. Minister Sarah Okonkwo of the African Continental Union was the first to break the silence. So we're facing an enemy that believes they're helping us, has never failed in their objectives, and commands the resources of 47 different alien civilizations. Does anyone have any good news to share? That brought a surprising smile to Captain Chen's face. Actually, yes. They've never faced anyone like us. She activated a new section of the display, showing data that had been quietly gathered by human intelligence services over the past 7 decades of interstellar expansion. Every species the Council has integrated shared certain characteristics. They were unified under single planetary governments. They had hierarchical social structures with clear chains of command. They developed space travel through careful, systematic research programs. They approached interstellar expansion methodically, establishing a few well-defended colonies close to their home systems. We're not like that at all, General Kim observed, beginning to understand where she was heading. Exactly, Chun confirmed, her excitement building. We've got 237 independent nation-states on Earth, each with their own military, their own research programs, and their own agendas. We've established colonies on 47 different worlds, not through systematic expansion, but because individual groups kept pushing further and further out, often against the advice of their own governments. We've got corporate colonies, religious colonies, scientific outposts, mining operations, and agricultural settlements scattered across dozens of star systems. Dr. Okafor picked up the thread. The Council's integration model is designed to co-opt planetary governments and gradually extend control through technological dependence and economic pressure. But we don't have a single point of failure. There's no central authority they can corrupt or coerce that would automatically bring all of humanity under their control. More than that, added Minister Okonkwo, our colonial model is completely different from what they've encountered before. Most alien species establish colonies as extensions of their homeworld governments. Our colonies were founded by people trying to get away from government control. They're populated by individualists, rebels, and people who specifically rejected the idea of being told how to live their lives. President Martinez felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since the intelligence briefing began. Are you telling me that our chaotic, fragmented, argumentative approach to civilization might actually be an advantage? It's our greatest advantage, Captain Chen confirmed. The Council expects to find a unified human government they can negotiate with. Instead, they're going to encounter a species where every colony ship captain considers themselves an independent authority, where corporations run their own private militaries, where religious groups have established sovereign territories on frontier worlds, and where the phrase, because the government said so, is more likely to inspire rebellion than compliance. The strategic implications were staggering. Admiral Patricia Zhao, who had been quietly running tactical calculations in her head, finally spoke up. If they're expecting to negotiate with a central authority, they'll likely send a small diplomatic fleet, maybe backed up by enough force to intimidate a single planetary government. They won't be prepared for coordinated resistance from dozens of independent military forces. Coordinated resistance? Laughed General Kim. Have you met us? We can't coordinate on anything. Just last month, the Mars colonies were threatening to declare war on the Europa Mining Consortium over water rights. How are we supposed to coordinate resistance against an alien invasion? We don't coordinate, Chen replied, and suddenly, everyone understood why she was smiling. That's the point. The Council's entire strategy depends on controlling the decision-making process. They negotiate with leaders, provide incentives to governments, and gradually extend their influence through established power structures. But what happens when there are no established power structures? What happens when every human group makes its own decisions, fights its own battles, and refuses to recognize anyone else's authority to surrender on their behalf? The room erupted in excited conversation as the implications became clear. The Galactic Council had never faced an enemy like this because no other species had evolved with such a fundamentally decentralized approach to civilization. Every other species they'd encountered had been easier to control precisely because they were more organized, more unified, more rational in their approach to governance. Dr. Okafor brought up the cultural analysis reports that have been compiled over the years of human expansion. There's another factor we haven't discussed yet. Every species the Council has integrated appears to have been motivated primarily by survival and resource acquisition. Their expansion into space was driven by practical necessity. And we're different how? Ambassador Liu asked. Because humans don't just explore space for resources or survival, Dr. Okafor replied, pulling up records of human colonial missions. Look at the mission statements of our various colonies. The New Geneva settlement was established to create a perfect democratic society free from Earth's political corruption. The Frontier's Edge mining operation was founded because someone said we couldn't survive on a Class M marginal world. The religious colony on Kepler 452b exists to practice our faith without interference from secular authorities. She gestured to dozens more examples. We explore space for freedom, for adventure, for the simple reason that we were told something was impossible. Half of our colonies exist because someone wanted to prove they could live independently, create something new, or escape from systems they considered oppressive. That's not rational resource acquisition behavior. It's pure human stubbornness, President Martinez observed, and she meant it as a compliment. Exactly. And that stubbornness is something the Council has never encountered before. Their psychological profiles are based on species that made rational cost-benefit analyses and concluded that submission was preferable to resistance. But humans don't make rational cost-benefit analyses when their independence is threatened. We make emotional, irrational, self-destructive decisions based on principle. Captain Shun pulled up historical examples that had been compiled for this exact purpose. The American Revolution, where a colonial population fought the most powerful military in the world rather than accept taxation without representation. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where a few hundred people with improvised weapons chose to fight the Nazi war machine rather than go quietly to their deaths. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956, where students and workers fought Soviet tanks with Molotov cocktails. The list goes on and on. Those examples all ended badly for the humans involved, General Kim pointed out. In the short term, yes, Chun agreed. But they established patterns of resistance that ultimately contributed to larger victories. The American Revolution inspired democratic movements worldwide. The Warsaw Ghetto fighters became symbols of resistance that helped sustain opposition to fascism. The Hungarian revolutionaries proved that Soviet control could be challenged, setting the stage for eventual liberation. Admiral Zhao was already thinking strategically. So our plan is to lose heroically and hope it inspires someone else to win later? Our plan is to be so difficult to control that the Council gives up trying, Captain Shin corrected. Every previous species they integrated had something to lose. Stable governments, established trade relationships, organized military forces that could be defeated or co-opted. We don't have any of that. We have 47 different worlds full of people who moved to those worlds specifically because they didn't want to be controlled by anyone. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Outer System monitoring stations. Captain Rodriguez of the Solar Defense Command appeared on the main screen, her expression tense. "We've got incoming signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple vessels, definitely alien origin, and they're broadcasting what appears to be diplomatic codes." A hush fell over the chamber. The Council fleet had arrived 3 weeks ahead of schedule. President Martinez took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her species' future settling on her shoulders. "How many ships, Captain?" 12 vessels, ranging from frigate to battleship size. They're maintaining position at the outer edge of the Kuiper Belt and requesting permission to approach Earth for diplomatic discussions. General Kim was already accessing military readiness reports. Our defensive capabilities? 347 active warships scattered across 17 different command structures, ranging from Earth Defense Force vessels to corporate security fleets to colonial militias, Admiral Zhao reported. No unified command structure, no standardized equipment, and absolutely no coordination between different groups. In any rational analysis, it was a recipe for disaster. Against any conventional enemy, the lack of coordination would have been fatal. But Captain Chen's probe had revealed something crucial about the Council's approach. They weren't expecting a conventional enemy. Sent a response to the Council fleet, President Martinez ordered. Inform them that Earth welcomes diplomatic contact, but they should be aware that humanity operates under a decentralized governmental system. Any agreements they wish to make will need to be negotiated separately with each independent human authority. Captain Rodriguez looked confused. "Ma'am, how many independent authorities should I tell them there are?" President Martinez smiled, and for the first time in days, it was a genuine expression of confidence. "Tell them we're still counting." The Galactic Council was about to receive their first real introduction to human civilization. They expected to find a young species ready for guidance, a planetary government eager for advanced technology, a unified authority that could be negotiated with, and gradually controlled. Instead, they were going to encounter 237 different Earth governments, 47 independent colonial administrations, dozens of corporate entities with their own military forces, religious groups that answered to no earthly authority, and individual colony ship captains who considered themselves sovereign powers. The Council had never failed to integrate a species because they had never encountered one that couldn't be integrated. Every previous species had central points of control, rational decision-making processes, and survival instincts that ultimately led them to accept Council authority. Humanity had none of those things. What they had instead was a deep, abiding suspicion of authority, a tendency to fight impossible odds out of sheer stubbornness, and a cultural identity built around the idea that freedom was more important than safety. The Council was about to learn why every other galactic civilization had found humans impossible to predict or control. They were about to discover that sometimes the species that looks the most chaotic and disorganized is actually the most dangerous to try to cage. The diplomatic first contact was scheduled to begin in 6 hours. Humanity had spent 70 years preparing for this moment without even knowing it. Every argument between colonial governments, every refusal to accept central authority, every decision to push further into the unknown had been building toward this confrontation. The Council believed they were about to guide another young species toward galactic citizenship. Humanity was about to show them the difference between guidance and conquest, and teach them that some species would rather die free than live in chains. Ambassador Zeth Kree stood in the command center of the Council flagship Harmony's Voice, his mechanical form processing thousands of data streams simultaneously as his fleet held position at the edge of the Sol system. The initial approach had gone exactly according to protocol. Broadcast diplomatic intentions, request permission for peaceful approach, and wait for the planetary government to respond with either acceptance or the more common initial resistance that would require gentle persuasion. What he hadn't expected was the response they'd received. Replay the human transmission again. He instructed the ship's AI, his optical sensors dimming as he focused on the linguistic patterns. The holographic display materialized, showing a middle-aged human female in what appeared to be military dress. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Solar Defense Command, speaking on behalf of the Earth Defense Council. We acknowledge your request for diplomatic contact and welcome peaceful dialogue. However, be advised that Earth operates under a decentralized governmental system. Any agreements you wish to negotiate will need to be discussed separately with individual human authorities. We are currently compiling a list of relevant parties and will transmit it shortly." "Curious," murmured Council Speaker Mordain, her gaseous form shifting to contemplative shades of blue as she floated beside him. "Decentralized government suggests either primitive political development or post-conflict fragmentation. Neither should present significant obstacles to integration." Zethkri wasn't so certain. His mechanical mind had been analyzing human communications intercept for the past several days, and what he discovered didn't match the typical patterns of species ready for council guidance. "Speaker, I recommend reviewing the preliminary cultural assessment before proceeding with standard protocols." The data streams that followed painted a confusing picture of human civilization. Instead of the expected unified planetary government, they had encountered evidence of hundreds of separate political entities, each apparently operating independently. Instead of a single military command structure, they had detected over 36 different armed forces with no apparent coordination between them. Instead of centralized colonial administration, human settlements appeared to be scattered across dozens of star systems with minimal oversight from Earth. "This is highly irregular," observed Ambassador Velkin from his environmental suit, the reptilian's scarred features visible through the transparent aluminum faceplate. "No species maintains this level of political fragmentation after achieving interstellar capability. The resource coordination requirements alone should have forced governmental consolidation. Perhaps they have recently emerged from a major civil war," suggested Kuthara of the insectoid swarms, her compound eyes reflecting the bridge's lighting as her hive mind processed the information. "Species often fragment temporarily following internal conflicts, but natural selection pressures usually restore unity within a few generations." Before anyone could respond, the communication system activated again, indicating another transmission from the humans. This time, instead of single speaker, the display showed what appeared to be a conference room filled with dozens of different individuals, each wearing distinctly different uniforms and insignia. "Greetings to the representatives of the Galactic Council," spoke the central figure, a woman whose clothing suggested civilian leadership rather than military command. "I am President Elena Martinez of the United Earth Federation. We have prepared a preliminary list of human authorities you may wish to engage with during your diplomatic mission." What followed was a presentation that left even the Council's advanced AI systems struggling to process the information. The humans had created a holographic organizational chart that stretched across multiple dimensions, showing governmental structures so complex that they defied easy categorization. The United Earth Federation represents approximately 43% of Earth's population, President Martinez continued, "but our authority is limited to specific geographical regions and does not extend to independently administered territories or off-world colonies. For matters concerning the European Continental Union, you'll need to speak with Chancellor Weber. For the African Continental Union, Minister Okonkwo will be your contact. The East Asian Defense Alliance operates under General Kim's authority, but they maintain separate diplomatic protocols from their civilian governments." The list continued, and continued, and continued. The Mars Colonial Confederation governs the largest off-world human population, but they maintain strict independence from Earth-based authorities. The Asteroid Mining Consortium controls most resource extraction operations in this solar system, but they operate under corporate rather than governmental structure. The Religious Settlements Alliance administers 17 different colonies established for spiritual purposes, and they recognize no secular authority over their internal affairs. Ambassador Zethkri's optical sensors were flickering rapidly as he tried to process the implications. How many separate governmental entities are they describing? Current count stands at 137 distinct authorities, the AI reported, and the human is continuing her presentation. She was indeed continuing, apparently oblivious to the stunned silence her words were creating among the council representatives. The Frontier Colonial Union represents settlements beyond the 50 light-year radius from Earth, but each individual colony maintains autonomous status. The Corporate Colonial Alliance manages privately funded settlements, with each corporation maintaining separate legal and military authorities. The Free Traders Cooperative operates the majority of human merchant vessels, but they recognize no planetary authority over their operations. Speaker Mordane's gaseous form had shifted to a sickly green color that indicated extreme confusion. This cannot be accurate. No spacefaring species maintains this level of organizational chaos. There must be some underlying power structure that actually controls human civilization. But the presentation continued for another 20 minutes, describing military forces that answered to different civilian authorities, corporate entities with their own armed fleets, religious groups that had established sovereign territories on distant worlds, and individual colony ship captains who apparently considered themselves independent nations. In summary, President Martinez concluded, "We count 217 separate Earth-based governmental entities, 47 independent colonial administrations, 36 corporate authorities with extraterritorial jurisdiction, and approximately 50 individual ships or stations that maintain autonomous status. We look forward to productive discussions with your representatives." The communication ended, leaving the council delegation in stunned silence. "They're lying. Death Who Thinks Finally," growled from the Devourers section. "No species can function with that level of political fragmentation. This is some kind of negotiation tactic designed to complicate integration procedures." But Ambassador Lindera of the Aquatic Federation had been conducting her own analysis of human communication patterns, and her conclusion was far more disturbing. Deep ocean philosophical analysis suggests they are speaking truthfully. The linguistic patterns, emotional undertones, and cultural references all indicate genuine accuracy in their statements. "Impossible," Zethkri responded immediately. "Our integration protocols are designed around standard governmental structures. We negotiate with planetary leadership, provide technological incentives to decision-makers, and gradually extend influence through established chains of command. If humans genuinely lack centralized authority, then our standard approaches may prove inadequate." The implications were staggering. Every successful integration in council history had followed the same basic pattern. Identify the power structure, co-opt the leadership, provide benefits that created dependence, and gradually extend control until the target species voluntarily accepted council authority. The process had been refined over thousands of years and had never failed because every spacefaring species had developed similar governmental structures out of practical necessity. Humans appear to have somehow achieved interstellar expansion while maintaining the kind of political fragmentation that should have made space travel impossible. "Request additional information about their decision-making processes," Mordane ordered, her form cycling through colors that indicated deep contemplation. "There must be some mechanism through which major decisions affecting their entire species are made." The response to this query came not from President Martinez, but from a completely different human wearing what appeared to be military insignia. "This is Admiral Zhao of the Solar Defense Command. Regarding your question about species-wide decision-making, we don't have any. Major decisions affecting all humanity would need to be ratified separately by each independent authority, which has never been successfully accomplished in our recorded history. Even relatively minor issues like standardized time zones or trade regulations require decades of negotiation between different governments." Zethkri felt something he had never experienced in his 3 millennia of existence: complete uncertainty about how to proceed. "Admiral, surely there must be some emergency protocol through which unified decisions can be made? Some authority that can speak for your entire species during critical situations?" "Negative," Admiral Zhao replied with what seemed to be genuine amusement. The closest we've ever come to unified action was during our global war approximately 80 years ago. And even then, we had multiple competing alliance structures fighting on the same side while maintaining separate command hierarchies. The idea of any single authority speaking for all of humanity is considered both practically impossible and philosophically abhorrent by most of our cultures. The Council delegation exchanged communications through their encrypted channels, each species expressing increasing levels of concern about the situation they were facing. This complicates integration significantly, Kuthara observed, her hive mind computing thousands of possible scenarios simultaneously. Standard protocols assume we can identify key decision-makers and influence their choices through appropriate incentives. If no such decision-makers exist, then we lack leverage to encourage voluntary compliance. More than that, Velkin added, his scarred features visible through his suit's faceplate. If they genuinely maintain this level of independence between different authorities, then co-opting some human leaders might not influence others. We could successfully negotiate with dozens of human governments and still face resistance from hundreds of others. The strategic implications were becoming clear, and they were deeply disturbing. The Council's integration process had never been designed to handle species that lacked centralized authority. Their entire approach was built around the assumption that rational leaders would recognize the benefits of Council membership and gradually bring their entire species into compliance. But what happened when there were no rational leaders? What happened when every human group made its own decisions based on its own priorities? What happened when success with one human authority provided no influence over any others? There is one additional factor we should consider, Zethkri announced after completing a detailed analysis of human expansion patterns. Their colonial distribution suggests they may be even more politically fragmented than their initial communications indicate. 47 different worlds, each with autonomous governmental structures, scattered across dozens of star systems with no apparent coordination between settlements. He projected a three-dimensional map showing human expansion patterns compared to typical species development. Where other civilizations showed careful, coordinated expansion from centralized authority, humans appear to have spread across space like some kind of adaptive virus, with each new settlement developing independently of all others. This is not political fragmentation, Speaker Mordain realized, her gaseous form shifting to deep purple as the full implications became clear. This is species-wide independence syndrome. Every human group appears to consider itself a separate authority with full sovereignty over its own affairs. But that's impossible, protested the representative from the Crystalline Collective, their geometric form pulsing with confusion. Species cannot maintain cohesion with that level of independence. They should have fragmented into competing subspecies or destroyed themselves through internal warfare. Yet they haven't, Lindera observed from her aquatic containment sphere. Somehow they have maintained species identity while refusing to accept any form of centralized authority. Our deep ocean philosophers have no historical precedent for such a phenomenon. The silence that followed was filled with the weight of 10,000 years of council experience being challenged by a single impossible species. Every integration, every successful guidance of young civilizations into galactic society have been based on fundamental assumptions about how intelligence species organize themselves. Humans appear to violate every one of those assumptions while somehow managing to thrive in ways that should have been impossible. Recommendations? Mordain asked finally. Standard integration protocols are inappropriate for current conditions, the AI reported. Alternative approaches are limited due to lack of precedent for species exhibiting these characteristics. Ambassador Zethkri ran probability calculations through his mechanical mind, exploring thousands of possible scenarios. All of them led to the same uncomfortable conclusion. We are facing a species that may be genuinely unintegrable through standard council procedures. They lack the governmental structures necessary for effective negotiation, the centralized decision-making required for binding agreements, and the rational leadership that would recognize the benefits of council membership. Then, we moved to alternative measures. Death Who Thinks growled. My people were also resistant to guidance initially. More direct approaches proved effective in overcoming their reluctance to accept proper authority. But, even as he spoke, the Devourer representative was accessing tactical analyses that suggested direct confrontation might prove equally challenging. Human military forces were scattered across dozens of star systems, operated under different command structures, and appeared to lack any centralized coordination that could be disrupted. Defeating one human military force would provide no advantage against the dozens of others, each operating independently according to their own strategic priorities. We need more information, Mordain decided. Initiate formal diplomatic contact with their primary governmental representatives. We will attempt to understand their decision-making processes more clearly before determining appropriate integration strategies. What none of the council representatives realized was that humanity had been preparing for this exact scenario for 70 years without even knowing it. Every argument between colonial governments, every refusal to accept Earth-based authority, every decision to establish independent settlements on distant worlds have been building toward this moment. The Council was about to discover that some species couldn't be integrated because they had evolved specifically to resist integration. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers, but their absolute refusal to allow any external authority to make decisions for them. The formal diplomatic meetings were scheduled to begin in 12 hours. The Council expected to encounter resistance that could be overcome through patient negotiation and appropriate incentives. Instead, they were about to face something far more dangerous, a species that genuinely didn't care what benefits they were offered because they valued their independence more than their safety. Humanity was about to teach the galaxy's most powerful alliance that some prizes were too dangerous to pursue, and some species were too stubborn to be controlled. The Grand Diplomatic Chamber aboard the Council flagship Harmony's Voice had been configured to accommodate the atmospheric requirements of 12 different alien species, but no one had anticipated the challenge of accommodating human psychology. Ambassador Zethkri watched through his optical sensors as the human delegation filed into the chamber, and immediately realized that the Council's careful preparations had been woefully inadequate. Instead of the expected small group of planetary leaders, 43 different humans had arrived on separate shuttlecraft, each representing what they claimed was an independent authority. They wore different uniforms, carried different insignia, and seemed to regard each other with the same polite suspicion they directed toward the alien representatives. "This is highly irregular," murmured Kuthara of the insectoid swarms, her compound eyes reflecting the confusion shared by her hive mind. "Standard diplomatic protocols call for a unified planetary delegation. How are we supposed to conduct meaningful negotiations with 43 different representatives?" Speaker Mordain floated at the center of the chamber, her gaseous form cycling through colors that indicated deep concern. "Perhaps we should have limited the invitation to their primary governmental authority." "Which one?" asked President Martinez with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "The United Earth Federation represents the largest population bloc, but the European Continental Union controls more industrial capacity. The East Asian Defense Alliance has the most advanced military technology, but the African Continental Union has the strongest economy. The Mars Colonial Confederation governs more territory than any Earth-based government, but the Asteroid Mining Consortium controls more resources." She gestured to the other humans in the chamber. "Admiral Chen speaks for the Solar Defense Command, but only within this star system. Captain Morrison represents the Free Traders Cooperative, which operates across 17 different systems, but recognizes no planetary authority. Minister Okafor leads the Religious Settlements Alliance, which governs 23 different worlds, but answers only to their spiritual leadership." The list continued, and with each addition, the Council representatives felt their carefully planned integration strategy crumbling. They had prepared for resistance, for negotiation, for the gradual process of convincing a unified planetary government to accept council guidance. They had not prepared for a species that appeared to have no unified planetary government to convince. Very well, Mordain announced, her form shifting to diplomatic gold. Let us begin with an overview of the benefits that council membership provides to developing species. The holographic display activated, showing the grand scope of galactic civilization. Thousands of worlds united in peaceful cooperation, advanced technologies that had eliminated scarcity and suffering, cultural exchange programs that had enriched countless civilizations, and the promise of immortality through consciousness transfer to digital substrates. Council membership offers protection from external threats, access to technologies that will advance your civilization by millennia, and the wisdom accumulated over 10,000 years of interspecies cooperation, Mordain explained. In exchange, we ask only for adherence to proven governmental structures, limitations on military expansion to prevent destabilizing conflicts, and acceptance of council oversight to ensure peaceful integration with galactic society. The human representatives listened politely, asked technical questions about the technologies being offered, and displayed what seemed to be genuine interest in the cultural exchange opportunities. For a moment, Zethkri allowed himself to hope that the integration might proceed more smoothly than expected. That hope died when the humans began responding to the Council's generous offer. The technological advances are certainly impressive, President Martinez acknowledged. However, the United Earth Federation cannot accept limitations on our military capabilities without ratification by our constituent member states, which would require a referendum process that typically takes 3 to 5 years to complete. The European Continental Union is interested in the consciousness transfer technology, added Chancellor Weber, but our ethical review process for life extension technologies requires approval from both our Scientific Council and Religious Advisory Board, which operate on different timelines and often reach contradictory conclusions. The Mars Colonial Confederation appreciates the offer of protection from external threats, said Governor Harrison, but we established our independence specifically to avoid external oversight of any kind. Accepting council authority would violate the fundamental principles that led to our colony's establishment. Each human representative had similar responses. Polite interest combined with complete inability to accept the basic requirements of council membership. They cited democratic processes that took years to complete, constitutional restrictions on surrendering sovereignty, cultural values that prevented acceptance of external authority, and bureaucratic procedures that made rapid decision-making impossible. Surely some of these obstacles can be overcome, Vulcan interjected from his environmental suit. The benefits we offer far outweigh the minor inconveniences of adjusting your governmental structures to meet galactic standards. Captain Morrison of the Free Traders Cooperative laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both amused and hostile. Minor inconveniences? You're asking us to surrender our independence to an alien government we've never heard of in exchange for technology we don't understand to solve problems we don't think we have. You face the same challenges that confront all young species, Mordain explained patiently. Resource competition, internal conflicts, the danger of self-destruction through uncontrolled technological development. Council guidance has prevented countless civilizations from following these destructive paths. Maybe, admitted Admiral Chun, but we'd rather face those challenges ourselves than let someone else solve them for us. That's kind of the whole point of being human. The statement was met with incomprehension from the council representatives. Species survival was the highest priority for every civilization they had encountered. The idea of preferring dangerous independence to safe guidance violated fundamental assumptions about rational behavior. But you could eliminate poverty, Kuthra pointed out, her hive mind calculating the mathematical certainty of human suffering under their current systems. You could end disease, extend lifespans indefinitely, explore the galaxy without the limitations of primitive technology. We could, agreed Minister Okafor of the Religious Settlements Alliance. But would we still be human afterward? Our struggles, our limitations, our mortality, These aren't flaws to be corrected. They're part of what defines us as a species. Besides, added Governor Martinez from the Frontier Colonial Union, who says we can't figure these things out ourselves? We've made it this far without alien guidance. Give us a few more centuries and see what we can accomplish on our own. The confidence in her voice was staggering. Here was a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel, facing representatives of a civilization that had existed for millennia, and they were expressing certainty that they could match or exceed Council achievements through their own efforts. A few centuries? Death Who Thinks growled from his section of the chamber. My people had the same arrogance. It led us to the brink of extinction. Only Council intervention saved us from our own destructive impulses. Maybe, Captain Morrison replied calmly, but at least they were your own destructive impulses. You got to fail on your own terms, make your own mistakes, learn your own lessons. That's more than you're offering us. The Devourer representative's voice modulator conveyed deep anger. We are offering you survival. We are offering you advancement. We are offering you peace and prosperity that will last for eternity. What more could any species want? Freedom, replied 43 human voices in perfect unison. It was the first moment of unity the Council had witnessed from the human delegation, and it was more frightening than any show of force could have been. These beings had argued and disagreed about every detail of the negotiations, represented dozens of competing authorities, and seemed incapable of coordinating their positions on any practical matter. But when it came to the fundamental question of their independence, they spoke with one voice. Freedom to make our own mistakes, President Martinez clarified. Freedom to fail spectacularly, if that's what happens. Freedom to succeed on our own terms, using our own methods, even if it takes longer and costs more than accepting your help. Freedom to tell anyone who wants to control us to go to hell, added Captain Morrison with cheerful hostility, no matter how good their intentions or how powerful their military. Zethkri processed the implications at superhuman speed, running probability calculations that all led to the same disturbing conclusion. You are rejecting an offer that would guarantee your species' survival and advancement. You are choosing potential extinction over certain prosperity. This is not rational behavior. Rationality is overrated, Admiral Chen replied. We've gotten this far on stubbornness, creativity, and sheer bloody-mindedness. If that's not enough to carry us through whatever challenges come next, then maybe we don't deserve to survive. The chamber fell silent as the weight of that statement settled over the assembled representatives. Every species the Council had encountered had been driven primarily by survival instincts. They had made rational calculations about costs and benefits, recognized the advantages of Council membership, and eventually chosen cooperation over independence. Humans appeared to be fundamentally different. They seemed to value their freedom more than their survival, their independence more than their prosperity, and their right to fail more than their guarantee of success. This is madness, Mordain declared, her gaseous form shifting to deep red. No intelligent species chooses extinction over advancement. There must be some misunderstanding, some failure of communication that is preventing you from recognizing the benefits we offer. We understand the benefits perfectly, Governor Harrison assured her. Advanced technology, extended lifespans, protection from external threats, peace, and stability that will last forever. They're very impressive benefits. Then, why do you refuse them? Because they're not worth the price you're asking, Minister Okafor replied. You want us to surrender our autonomy, accept external control over our development, and restructure our entire civilization to meet your standards. That's not membership, that's conquest with better marketing. The accusation hit the Council representatives like a physical blow. They were offering guidance, protection, and advancement to a young species that desperately needed all three. The idea that their generous offer could be characterized as conquest was deeply offensive to beings who had spent millennia helping lesser civilizations achieve their full potential. We are not conquerors, Velkin protested, his scarred features visible through his suit's faceplate. We are teachers, guides, protectors. Every species we have integrated has benefited immensely from Council membership. Because the ones who didn't benefit didn't survive to complain about it, Captain Morrison pointed out. You've got a 100% success rate because you define success as total submission to your authority. That's not teaching, that's indoctrination. And what happens to species that refuse your generous guidance? Admiral Chun asked pointedly. Do you just shrug your shoulders and wish them well? Or do you find ways to convince them that submission is in their best interests? The question hung in the air like a weapon. The Council had never encountered a species that refused integration, so the scenario had never been tested. But the implications of the question were clear. If peaceful integration failed, would the Council resort to more direct methods? Council policy has always emphasized peaceful cooperation. Mordain replied carefully. We have never found it necessary to use coercive measures to convince species of the benefits of membership. Because no species has ever been stubborn enough to refuse you, President Martinez observed. We might be the first, and if you are, Death Who Thinks growled. If you choose extinction over enlightenment, what then? Do you expect the Council to simply accept the existence of a chaotic, unpredictable species spreading across the galaxy without guidance or oversight? The threat was subtle but unmistakable. The Council might prefer peaceful integration, but they would not tolerate the existence of an uncontrolled species that could potentially destabilize their carefully ordered galactic civilization. Are you threatening us? Admiral Chen asked, her voice remaining calm despite the implications of the question. We are explaining the realities of galactic civilization, Zethkri replied. Species that refuse to accept appropriate guidance pose threats to established order. Such threats cannot be permitted to persist indefinitely. There it is, Captain Morrison said with satisfaction. The truth behind all the talk about benefits and cooperation and advancement. Accept our control voluntarily, or we'll impose it by force. It doesn't have to come to that, Mordain insisted, her form shifting to pleading yellow. Surely we can find some compromise, some arrangement that provides the benefits of Council membership while addressing your concerns about autonomy. What kind of compromise? President Martinez asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer would be unacceptable. Limited Council oversight, Mordain offered. Gradual integration over several centuries. Technological sharing without immediate governmental restructuring. We are willing to be patient with your species development. But ultimately, we still end up under Council control, Governor Harrison pointed out. Whether it takes 5 years or 5 centuries, the end result is the same. Humanity becomes another well-behaved member of your galactic civilization, following your rules, accepting your guidance, and abandoning everything that made us who we are. And what exactly is so valuable about who you are? Death Who Thinks demanded. You are a chaotic, violent, unpredictable species that has spent most of its history fighting wars over trivial differences. What possible benefit is there to preserving such characteristics? Minister Okafor smiled, and there was something in that expression that made even the mechanical Zethkri feel uneasy. You're about to find out. The negotiations had been proceeding for 6 hours, and it was becoming clear that no amount of discussion would bridge the fundamental gap between Council expectations and human nature. The aliens offered safety, prosperity, and advancement in exchange for submission. The humans valued their independence more than their lives. I believe we have reached an impasse, Mordain announced, her form cycling through colors that indicated deep frustration. You refuse to accept the benefits of Council membership, yet you cannot be permitted to continue your chaotic expansion without proper guidance. Then, we have a problem, Admiral Chen replied calmly, because we're going to continue our expansion whether you permit it or not, and we're going to do it according to our own standards rather than yours. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The Council had offered humanity their standard integration package and been refused. They had explained the dangers of uncontrolled development and been ignored. They had hinted at the consequences of defying galactic order and been challenged. For the first time in 10,000 years, they were facing a species that couldn't be integrated through peaceful means and refused to be deterred by implicit threats. Then, you leave us with no alternative, Zethkri announced, his optical sensors brightening as he accessed tactical assessments. If you will not accept voluntary guidance, then guidance must be imposed for the good of galactic stability. There it is, Captain Morrison said cheerfully, the iron fist behind the velvet glove. I was wondering when you dropped the pretense of benevolent guidance and admit what this really is. This is your last opportunity to reconsider, Mordain warned. Accept council membership willingly, and your species will prosper under our protection. Refuse, and face the consequences of defying galactic order. President Martinez stood up, and one by one, the other human representatives did the same. 43 different authorities, representing hundreds of independent governments and millions of stubborn, contrary, impossible human beings. We refuse, she said simply. All of us. Every human government, every colonial authority, every corporate entity, every individual ship captain. We refuse your guidance. We refuse your protection. And we refuse your control. Then, you have chosen extinction. Death Who Thinks growled with satisfaction. So be it. But, as the human delegation prepared to leave the chamber, Captain Morrison turned back with one final comment that would haunt the council representatives for years to come. You know what the funny thing is? You could have been our allies. You could have traded with us, learned from us, maybe even become friends. Instead, you decided we needed to be controlled. He smiled, and there was something in that expression that reminded every alien in the chamber of humanity's predatory ancestry. You're about to discover the difference between a species that needs guidance and one that chooses freedom. It's going to be educational for all of us. The negotiations were over. Humanity had rejected every offer, defied every threat, and chosen independence over safety. The Council was about to learn what happened when an irresistible force met an truly immovable object. The war for humanity's freedom was about to begin. The Council's first mistake was assuming that humanity's rejection of their authority was an emotional response that could be corrected through a demonstration of superior force. Their second mistake was believing that humans would behave rationally when faced with overwhelming odds. Their third and most critical mistake was underestimating what 47 independent human colonies, scattered across dozens of star systems, could accomplish when they all decided to fight for the same cause. Ambassador Zethkri stood in the command center of Harmony's voice, watching tactical displays that made no sense according to everything the Council knew about warfare. The human response to their enforcement action had begun exactly as predicted. Earth's defensive fleets had been swept aside within hours, and the planet itself was now under Council blockade. Major human colonies had surrendered after token resistance, and the corporate entities had quickly agreed to accept Council oversight in exchange for favorable trade agreements. Everything was proceeding according to the standard integration pattern, which made the current situation all the more confusing. Status report on human resistance activities, he requested from the fleet AI. Organized resistance has ceased in all major population centers, the AI reported. Earth government representatives have begun negotiations for conditional surrender. Colonial authorities are requesting terms for peaceful integration. Corporate entities have suspended independent operations pending Council approval. It should have been over. Every previous species had followed the same pattern. Initial defiance followed by recognition of Council superiority, then gradual acceptance of the benefits of integration. The demonstration of overwhelming force was usually sufficient to convince even the most stubborn species that resistance was futile. But something was wrong. The tactical displays showed successful occupation of major human settlements, but they also showed dozens of smaller indicators scattered across multiple star systems, moving in patterns that made no strategic sense. What are these secondary signals? Zethkri asked, highlighting the anomalous readings. Individual human vessels and minor settlements maintaining independent operations, the AI replied. Current count, 1,347 separate entities showing continued resistance activities. That number was impossible. The Council's intelligence had identified perhaps 200 significant human authorities, and most of those had already been neutralized or co-opted. Where were over 1,000 additional resistance groups coming from? The answer arrived in the form of a transmission broadcast simultaneously to every Council vessel in human space. Instead of the expected plea for mercy or offer of surrender, they received what appeared to be a message from a single human in civilian clothing, speaking from what looked like a cargo ship's bridge. "This is Captain Sarah Kim of the independent freighter Lucky Strike," the human announced calmly. "I'm broadcasting this message on behalf of the Free Human Alliance, which as of this morning includes every human being who refuses to accept alien control over our species." Zethkri's optical sensors flickered as he processed the implications. Individual ship captains are claiming to represent Alliance structures. "I know what you're thinking," Captain Kim continued, as if she could hear his thoughts. "How can a single cargo ship captain claim to represent anyone other than herself?" The answer is simple. She can't. "I don't represent anyone except my crew, my ship, and my own stubborn refusal to bow to alien authority." The transmission quality improved as other ships joined the broadcast, their signals combining to create a network that spanned multiple star systems. "This is Captain Rodriguez of New Horizon," came another voice. "Independent colony ship carrying 3,000 settlers to the Kepler system. We don't recognize Council authority, we don't accept Council guidance, and we sure as hell don't intend to surrender to alien invaders." Captain Morrison here, representing the Free Traders Cooperative, added a familiar voice. "That's 47 merchant vessels, 6 mining platforms, and approximately 12,000 people who would rather die free than live in chains." The voices multiplied. Ship captains, colony administrators, mining foremen, research station commanders, and individual settlers, each claiming to represent only themselves but somehow forming a resistance network that stretched across human space. "Combined military assets of the Free Human Alliance," Captain Kim announced with pride, "consist of approximately 800 armed merchant vessels, 234 corporate security ships, 147 colonial defense platforms, and exactly 0 formal military vessels." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried an edge that reminded every alien listener of humanity's predatory ancestry. "We know we can't defeat your fleet in direct combat. We know we don't have the technology to match your weapons. We know that any rational species would surrender at this point rather than face extinction." Another pause. "Good thing we're not rational." What followed was the most unconventional military campaign in galactic history. The Free Human Alliance didn't attempt to fight the Council fleet in pitched battles. Instead, they disappeared into the vast emptiness of interstellar space, using their superior knowledge of local systems to conduct hit-and-run attacks against Council supply lines. Merchant vessels loaded with improvised weapons struck at Council transport ships before vanishing into asteroid fields that no sane pilot would attempt to navigate. Mining platforms used their industrial equipment to lay traps in shipping lanes that the Council had assumed were secure. Colonial defense platforms fired their single-use weapons at Council vessels before evacuating their entire populations to hidden bases and systems that didn't appear on any official charts. "This is not warfare," Death Who Thinks protested during the daily strategy meeting. "This is chaos. They have no central command structure, no strategic objectives, no coordination between different groups. How can we fight an enemy that doesn't follow basic military principles?" The answer came from Speaker Mordain, whose gaseous form had been cycling through colors of deep frustration for weeks. "We can't fight them because they're not fighting us. They're simply refusing to be controlled, and there's no military solution to a philosophical problem." The truth of her statement was becoming clearer with each passing day. Traditional military doctrine was designed to defeat organized resistance by disrupting command structures, capturing strategic objectives, and forcing enemy leadership to accept unfavorable terms. But humans had no command structures to disrupt, no strategic objectives that could be captured, and no leadership that could surrender on behalf of their entire species. Every human group made its own decisions, fought its own battles, and considered itself answerable to no authority other than its own conscience. Defeating one group provided no advantage against any others, and the Council was discovering that there were far more independent human groups than their intelligence had ever suggested. Current count of active resistance entities has reached 2,047, the AI reported during one particularly frustrating briefing. This represents an increase of 632 groups since the beginning of enforcement operations. How is that possible? Vulcan demanded from his environmental suit. We have neutralized over 300 human military assets. How can their numbers be increasing? The answer came from an unlikely source. Ambassador Lindera of the Aquatic Federation, whose deep ocean philosophers have been studying human behavior patterns since the conflict began. They're not military assets, she observed from her containment sphere. They're civilians who have decided to become combatants. Every time we capture a human transport, destroy a mining station, or occupy a colony, the survivors don't surrender. They acquire weapons, band together with other refugees, and join the resistance. But that's impossible, Kuthara protested, her hive mind struggling to process the concept. Civilian populations accept military occupation once their formal defenses are defeated. That's how war works. Not for humans, Lindera replied. Our analysis suggests that humans don't distinguish between military personnel and civilian populations during existential conflicts. When their freedom is threatened, every human becomes a potential combatant. The implications were staggering. The Council was not fighting a human military, they were fighting human civilization itself. Every merchant captain who chose to arm his ship rather than surrender, every mining foreman who turned his equipment into weapons, every colonial administrator who evacuated his people to hidden bases rather than accept occupation was adding to the resistance. Then we increased the pressure, Death Who Thinks growled. Make the cost of resistance so high that they choose submission over extinction. But increased pressure only made the situation worse. Orbital bombardments that destroyed human settlements created refugee populations that joined the resistance. Seizure of human shipping created desperate people with nothing left to lose. Occupation of major colonies forced human authorities to relocate to smaller, more dispersed settlements that were even harder to control. 6 months into the conflict, the Council controlled every major human population center, had destroyed the majority of human military assets, and had successfully occupied Earth itself. According to every measure of military success, they had won decisively. But the resistance was stronger than ever. Current active resistance entities, 4,218, the AI reported. Estimated human population under direct Council control, 47%. Estimated human population actively participating in resistance operations, 31%. Estimated human population maintaining neutral status, 22%. The numbers were impossible to reconcile. The Council had achieved total military victory, but somehow nearly a third of the human population was still fighting them. Traditional integration protocols called for complete pacification before beginning cultural restructuring, but complete pacification seemed to be retreating further from reach with each passing month. We need to reconsider our approach, Mordain announced during a closed session of the senior Council representatives. Military occupation is not producing the desired results. Because we're not fighting a military, Zethkri realized, his mechanical mind finally processing the true nature of the conflict. We're fighting an idea. The idea that some species would rather die free than live in submission. Ideas can be defeated, Death Who Thinks insisted. My people held similar ideas about independence and racial superiority. Proper re-education eliminated those dangerous concepts within a single generation. Your people had a unified culture that could be systematically restructured, Velkin pointed out. Humans have dozens of different cultures, hundreds of different governmental systems, and apparently thousands of different groups that consider themselves independent authorities. There's no central point of leverage that would allow systematic cultural modification. The debate continued for hours, but gradually a disturbing consensus emerged. Humanity might genuinely be unintegrable through any method the Council had previously employed. Their decentralized nature made military conquest ineffective. Their individualistic culture made re-education impossible, and their stubborn refusal to accept rational cost-benefit analyses made negotiation futile. Then, what do you recommend? Mordain asked finally. Total extermination? The question hung in the air like a weapon. In 10,000 years of galactic civilization, the Council had never resorted to complete genocide. Even the most resistant species had eventually been integrated through patient application of appropriate pressure. The idea of systematically destroying an entire intelligent species violated fundamental principles that had guided Council policy since its founding. The alternative, Zethkri pointed out, is accepting the existence of an uncontrolled species that will continue expanding according to their own chaotic principles. They have already proven that they cannot be guided, cannot be contained, and cannot be deterred by demonstrations of superior force. If we allow them to survive, they will eventually spread across the galaxy without any oversight or limitation. It was true, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Humans had continued their expansion even during the height of the conflict, establishing new colonies in systems the Council didn't even know existed, sending out colony ships to destinations that wouldn't be reached for decades. Their resistance network had actually grown stronger under pressure, developing new tactics and technologies that made them increasingly difficult to control. But before anyone could respond to Zethkri's observation, they were interrupted by an emergency communication from the occupation fleet around Earth. "This is Admiral Tvek reporting from Sol System," came the urgent transmission. "We have a problem." The holographic display activated, showing tactical information from Earth orbit. What they saw defied belief. Thousands of small spacecraft rising from the planet's surface, heading outward toward the edge of the solar system. Not military vessels attempting to engage the Council fleet, but civilian transports loaded with refugees fleeing the occupied world. Population exodus is accelerating beyond our ability to intercept, Admiral Tvek reported. Current estimates suggest that over 10 million humans have evacuated Earth in the past month, using everything from commercial transports to improvised spacecraft constructed from industrial equipment. "Where are they going?" Morton demanded. "Everywhere," came the grim reply. "They're scattering across dozens of star systems, some heading for established colonies, but many departing for coordinates that don't correspond to any known human settlements. Long-range sensors suggest they're planning to establish new colonies in previously unexplored systems." The implications hit every Council representative simultaneously. They weren't just failing to control existing human populations. They were actually causing humanity to spread faster and further than they had ever expanded on their own. "It gets worse," Admiral Tvek continued. "Intelligence reports suggest that human resistance groups have been deliberately provoking Council occupation forces in populated areas, using our own military responses to justify large-scale evacuations. They're using our attempts to control them as recruitment tools for their resistance movement." Zethkri felt something he had never experienced in 3 millennia of existence. The sensation of being outmaneuvered by a species that should have been no match for Council intelligence and technology. "They're not trying to defeat us militarily. They're using our occupation as a diaspora mechanism, spreading their population so widely that complete control becomes impossible. More than that, Lindera observed from her aquatic containment sphere. Our deep ocean philosophers believe they're deliberately evolving their civilization to become uncontrollable. Every human group that establishes an independent colony becomes a separate center of resistance. Every refugee population that learns to survive without centralized support becomes harder to integrate. They're using our pressure to transform themselves into something that cannot be conquered by any force we're capable of applying. The silence that followed was filled with the weight of 10,000 years of council authority being challenged by a species that had learned to thrive on adversity. Recommendations? Mordain asked, though her tone suggested she already knew that no good options remained. Complete withdrawal from human space, Zethkri announced, surprising himself with the certainty of his conclusion. Immediate cessation of all integration efforts. Establishment of containment barriers around human-controlled systems, with standing orders to prevent further expansion into Council territory. That surrender, Death Who Thinks protested. We cannot allow a single species to defy Council authority. The precedent alone would encourage resistance from dozens of other integrated species. The alternative is a war we cannot win against an enemy that grows stronger with every attack we make, Zethkri replied. Humans have proven that they will choose extinction over submission. If we continue this conflict, we face the choice between committing genocide against an entire species or watching them spread their philosophy of independence across the galaxy. And if they do spread that philosophy? Velkin asked quietly. The question everyone had been avoiding finally hung in the open. What happened to galactic civilization if other species learned that the Council could be defied? What happened to 10,000 years of carefully maintained order if humans proved that independence was possible? Then, the galaxy changes, Mordain answered, her gaseous form shifting to colors that indicated acceptance of an unpleasant truth. Perhaps permanently. The vote, when it came, was closer than any in Council history. The decision to withdraw from human space passed by a margin of only 3 votes, with several species abstaining rather than choose between genocide and surrender. But pass it did. 3 days later, the Council fleet began its withdrawal from Sol System. The occupation forces evacuated Earth. The blockade was lifted, and humanity was officially designated as a contained threat to be monitored but not engaged. The message that Captain Sarah Kim broadcast to every human settlement in known space was brief and to the point. This is the Free Human Alliance broadcasting on all frequencies. The alien invasion fleet has withdrawn from Earth. All human colonies are free to resume independent operations. The Council offered us guidance, protection, and advancement in exchange for our freedom. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the pride of a species that had faced extinction rather than surrender their principles. We told them to go to hell. We remained free. Across human space, in colonial settlements and mining platforms, aboard merchant vessels and research stations, millions of humans received that message and understood what it meant. They had faced the most powerful force in the galaxy and refused to submit. They had proven that some species valued freedom more than safety, independence more than prosperity, and the right to choose their own path more than guaranteed survival. The Council retreated to their crystalline stations and administrative centers, nursing wounds that went deeper than military defeat. For the first time in their existence, they had encountered something they couldn't control, couldn't integrate, and couldn't understand. Humanity continued their chaotic expansion into the galaxy, establishing colonies according to their own incomprehensible principles, trading with species the Council had never heard of, and generally ignoring the carefully maintained order that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. And slowly, quietly, other species began to take notice. The Aquatic Federation started questioning why they needed Council approval for their deep ocean research projects. The Crystalline Collective wondered why their geometric expansion patterns required oversight from beings who didn't even understand their mathematical poetry. The energy beings asked why they had surrendered control of their consciousness-sharing networks to authorities who operated on fundamentally different principles. The question spread, species by species, world by world, until the galaxy faced something it hadn't experienced in 10,000 years, the possibility of change. The Council had been right about one thing. Humanity did need guidance. But they had been wrong about who should provide it. Humans would guide themselves, make their own mistakes, and find their own path among the stars. And in doing so, they would prove that some prizes were worth any sacrifice, some principles were worth any cost, and some species were meant to be free. The galaxy would never be the same.